Before Zeus ruled from the sky, there was chaos, real chaos. Not a storm, not a void, but a living, breathing uncertainty that even the gods feared. From it rose earth, sky, and the first act of rebellion, a son turning on his father. The story of Greek mythology isn't just creation. It's a political revolution written in divine blood. Stay with me as we watch the cosmos form its first government, one thunderbolt at a time. What if the universe began not with light or sound, but with an empty breath called chaos? In the earliest Greek telling, everything started not from a spark, but from space itself, a yawning gap that wasn't absence, but potential. There was no sky yet, no earth, no sea, just a raw openness waiting to become something. From that formless gap, the first presences stirred. Gaia, the vast earth, settled as the first ground. Tartarus sank deep below, becoming the dark foundation of depth. And Eros, desire or attraction, appeared as the first motion that drew everything else together. That's the part that feels so striking about the Greek vision. Creation wasn't mechanical or engineered. It began with relationships. Gaia and Tartarus were more than places. They were living principles, the stability of form and the pull of the unknown. And in between them, Eros was the impulse of joining and dividing. The universe didn't unfold because someone planned it. It happened because one thing reached for another. Desire became the first law of being. Across cultures, beginnings are often told as acts of speech or command. The word that summons light, the sound that divides night and day. But in the old Greek view, existence didn't start with declaration. It began with yearning. Chaos wasn't evil or void. It was tension, a kind of breath that needed direction. Each being that emerged from it carried that same tension inside. Gaia, for instance, wasn't a sculpted earth. She was the act of grounding itself, the instinct to root and stabilize. She represents what it means to hold form amidst turmoil. We can think of chaos as the open hand, and Gaia as the first gesture that closed it into something solid. In this way, the Greek cosmos began by correcting its own instability. Tartarus followed as the counterweight, a pressure beneath everything living, while Eros kept the current moving. Creation became a conversation of opposites, each step a response rather than a commandment. That's why the myths tell us less about design and more about reaction. The ancient poets saw existence as participatory. Every act left ripples. Every union produced consequence. There's a quiet kind of wisdom in the ordering. The Greeks didn't explain what caused chaos to divide. They seemed content to show that division happens because life wants to know itself. Each emergence drew contrast from what came before. When Gaia solidified, she didn't stop expanding. Her presence invited relationship. She gave shape to what chaos had allowed, but she also carried within her the seed of loneliness, the need for complement. That desire summoned Uranus, the sky, rising around and above her. Together, they formed the first pair of opposites to share power, earth and sky, grounded and unbounded. In that pairing, we see the first shadow of imbalance. Uranus covers Gaia completely. She holds him, but cannot breathe freely under his reach. Their union is fertile, yet restrictive. Out of their closeness came not order, but pressure. It's here that the Greek creation feels different from many others. It begins already straining toward conflict. The cosmos forms not through balance, but through struggle to achieve it. The love between earth and sky produces life, but also confinement, setting a tone that will echo across generations of gods. Still, before that tension hardened, there must have been a moment of awe. the first mountains grew from Gaia. The first stars glittered on Uranus's skin. Creation, as told by these early stories, carries no ceremony of perfection. The world arrives as if by accident, an outcome of motion colliding with form. Desire calls forth matter, matter calls forth boundary, and boundary inevitably calls for escape. Each god embodies a force we still recognize: Earth's patience, sky's authority, the underworld's depth, and the binding thread of desire that keeps them all connected. What this means is that from the very start, Greek mythology treats existence like an ecosystem of needs. Where other traditions often speak of obedience to a creator, here the universe learns itself through mistakes and expansions. There's no omnipotent hand placing the planets. Instead, creation looks like a chain reaction, a breath, a stir, a yearning. The gods don't descend into the world. They are the world, its moods and shifts given personal faces. Chaos becomes the felt space between decisions. Gaia becomes the reliability of the ground underfoot. Tartarus becomes consequence. And Eros becomes the glue that turns accident into continuity. This personification of forces makes the mythology emotional at its core. It portrays the universe not as an object, but as an ongoing relationship. The poets call Gaia a mother, but not because she nurtures in any gentle sense. She endures, she supports, and she suffers the weight of everything that will arise from her. In a way, she becomes the first symbol of responsibility. To create is also to contain. Uranus, her counterpart, symbolizes freedom stretched too far, the instinct to expand without measure. Together, they represent the dual pulse of creation: containment and release. If we think of chaos as the breath, Gaia as the heart, and Uranus as the endless inhale above her, then we can sense why their story turns uneasy. The harmony of heaven and earth sounds ideal, but it hides a mismatch. The sky desires to cover, the earth yearns to give. Their closeness leaves no room for what they create. This foundational imbalance will shape every myth that follows. Conflict isn't the interruption of order, it's the mechanism that produces it. In that sense, the birth of the world already carries its politics. The Greeks used their myths to mirror the patterns they saw in nature and in human life. The rule of one element over another never lasts. Each dominance provokes its successor. So the joining of Gaia and Uranus isn't the end of chaos, it's its continuation in disguise. What began as emptiness evolves into tension, then into pressure that begs release. The first mountains are born not gently, but through the urge to separate. Even beauty comes with rupture. When we trace these threads, we start to see how creation, desire, and conflict form a single arc. There's no moral attached to it, no right or wrong, only process. The ancient poets let these stories breathe like living metaphors. Chaos shows that existence begins from openness. Gaia teaches the necessity of form, and Uranus introduces the problem of restraint. Life emerges between their competing needs. In that friction, storytelling finds its first pulse of drama. What happens when the sky tries to control what the earth brings forth? So when the old myths introduced Uranus rising from Gaia, they were really exploring that moment every relationship faces: the struggle over space, the balance between giving and taking. Their story reminds us that creation rarely stops at formation. It continues through confrontation. In that sense, the birth of the cosmos was never peaceful. It was already preparing for inheritance, for revolt, for the coming of children who would not accept the balance they were born into. Gaia becomes both comfort and catalyst, her stillness giving Uranus a stage, while his vastness pushes her to evolve. The whole pattern feels alive with contradiction. The sky wants permanence, the earth wants change. Their union can't last, and yet without it, the world has no frame. This is how Greek mythology tells us that creation and destruction share the same origin. From one breath of chaos, every possibility unfolds, and already a feud is forming between what seeks to expand and what needs to hold firm. The universe has found its rhythm: desire, growth, resistance. And from that rhythm, rulership will emerge. What follows next is not peace, but the first claim of ownership. Uranus, standing above all, begins to act as if the sky itself owns what it shelters. The cycle of imbalance becomes law. And from that illusion of control, the story of gods and rebellion truly begins. Every ruler in myth begins with love that becomes fear. Uranus's story started the cycle. When sky and earth first came together, their bond seemed eternal. Uranus stretched himself over Gaia like a canopy, enclosing her in his reach. From their union came life on an immense scale. The Titans emerged first, vast, enduring forces of nature made flesh. They were followed by the Cyclopes, beings of raw energy whose single eyes glowed like the hearts of volcanoes. Then came the hundred-handed ones, shapes so strange and strong that even their mother trembled when they moved. Creation had reached a fevered pace, a natural surge of abundance overflowing every boundary. Yet with that gift came excess, and with excess, fear. Uranus watched what he and Gaia had made and began to recoil. To him, their offspring were not symbols of beauty or order. They were reminders that power leaves no space for control. His children were too large, too unpredictable. The Titans, though noble and vast, hinted at independence. The Cyclopes burned with elemental force, and the hundred-handed ones embodied raw unrest. To Uranus, creation now seemed like rebellion waiting to happen. In his dread, he turned on the very source of that birth, the earth itself. He forced the children back into her, burying them deep within her body, refusing to let them see light. What began as union turned into confinement. For Gaia, that act was unbearable. The same womb that had opened to life was now used as a prison. The pain of holding her own offspring inside gnawed at her from within. Their massive bodies pressed against her depths, straining for freedom. Every tremor that followed, the shaking of soil, the grinding of stone, was her silent cry. The myth translates that cosmic agony into something both physical and emotional. You can sense the weight of pressure, the airless swelling beneath the world, where creation itself was being suffocated. In nature, this became a metaphor for the earthquakes and eruptions that split the earth open. But in story, it became the first spiritual protest, a mother's endurance turning slowly into rage. The image of Uranus sealing his children inside Gaia carries another layer. It shows how creation, once controlled, breeds destruction. By trying to halt growth, Uranus created resistance. The world, both living and divine, could no longer breathe. This cycle mirrors a truth familiar to ancient thinkers. Each phase of existence contains its own undoing. When vitality is suppressed, it changes form. Energy doesn't vanish, it builds. Under Gaia's surface, that energy began to stir, restless and forming intent. The children within her, massive and unseen, heard her pain and shared it. Their prison became a womb again, but now what would emerge was not creation, but defiance. In human terms, you might call this story a reflection of repression. The way denied power becomes explosive. Uranus represents a kind of authority that mistakes silence for peace. He confuses control with harmony. Gaia, by contrast, embodies life's push for release. that natural insistence that things must move forward. It's not gentleness that defines her here, but endurance. She waits, she bears, she plots. The ancient poets made her the first strategist, a sign that even in myth, the earth itself is not passive. It tolerates much, but never forever. So the endless night of confinement stretched on. The Titans inside Gaia grew restless. The strain of being denied form made them ache with purpose. Gaia felt every pulse, every attempt to move, and she knew the moment had come to act. Using the very material of herself, metal from her own body, stone from her own ribs, she forged a curved blade, a sickle sharpened for one task. The image is both literal and symbolic. The sickle, tool of the harvest, marks the cycle of cutting and renewal. It means that endings and beginnings share one edge. What Uranus saw as defiance was, in this deeper sense, nature correcting itself. When Gaia called out to her children, her voice wasn't thunderous. It was steady, persuasive. She told them of the injustice within her, of the weight they bore together. Many of the Titans hesitated. Their father still stretched over them, vast and mighty, his rule seemingly unbreakable. Most shrank back, unwilling to face that power, but one among them listened to her words closely. Cronus, the youngest, the sharpest in cunning, saw possibility where others saw risk. Youth in myth always carries change. It acts before reflection can tame it. Cronus agreed to take the sickle and wait for the moment when sky would descend once again upon earth. That accord between mother and son marks the birth of rebellion itself in these stories. It was the first conspiracy, the first act of divine revolution. Yet it wasn't born out of hatred alone. It came from necessity, from balance demanding restoration. Every myth carries echoes of the world that made it. People who told this story saw their kings and natural forces in the habits of gods. What this means is that Uranus's tyranny resonated as a warning. When authority denies growth, it sparks revolt. Gaia's crafting of the sickle transformed suffering into strategy. She turned endurance into action. The waiting ended when Uranus descended once more to lie with Gaia. In that closeness, he meant to assert control. In that same closeness, she opened the door for revolt. Cronus rose with the sickle, fulfilling the plan his mother had shaped. The strike that followed would divide heaven from earth forever. But at this point in our story, we pause before that moment, not for suspense, but for understanding. Rebellion here acts like nature's own rhythm. Compression followed by release. The old rule of sky could not withstand the pressure it caused. The world itself demanded transformation. Looking at Uranus and Gaia through this lens, we can see them as archetypes of two forces that still shape every story of power: dominance and renewal. Uranus expands without restraint, covering what he loves until nothing else can move. Gaia, by contrast, absorbs what she must until she can bear it no longer. When repression outweighs creation, nature finds its turning point. Their myth is less about vengeance than about balance restored through rupture. The Greeks, always observant of cycles, understood that even gods obey the laws of motion. There's also a psychological echo here. The act of locking away what frightens us, the ugly, the chaotic, the unfamiliar, isn't unique to Uranus. We all do versions of it. But the myth warns that buried forces do not disappear. They grow teeth. Gaia's anguish captures that truth perfectly. Through her, the world learns that creation cannot be controlled without cost. It bends, it swells, it seeks exit. When Cronus accepts her weapon, he becomes the embodiment of that pressure, finally breaking free. When we think of Uranus now, he stands as a figure of fear dressed in love, a ruler who could not tell devotion from domination. His downfall, which waits just beyond this moment, feels inevitable. Because authority built on suppression faces a paradox. The tighter it holds, the more energy gathers against it. Gaia's alliance with Cronus doesn't erase the pain she endured. It transforms it into power. Through their pact, the cosmos takes its first revolutionary breath. As we leave this chapter, the scene freezes on that balance. A mother steady in her resolve, a son ready with the blade, and a sky unaware that its age is ending. A single act will soon rewrite the structure of the world and set in motion the rhythm of succession that defines every mythic age to come. The question lingering underneath it all remains timeless. Once you strike down a tyrant, what price do you pay for becoming the next in line? Creation continued not through peace, but through a single act that turned the heavens into the sea's foam. When Cronus raised his mother's sickle, the cosmos paused. The sky pressed close once more to Earth, unaware that within her, defiance waited with sharpened edge. In that charged silence, time seemed to hold its breath. Then came the strike. The curved blade met its mark, and the body of Uranus was torn apart from the world he once ruled. The first act of violence between gods split heaven from earth forever. Cronus's ambush was more than an attack. It was the first division of order by intention. Uranus had smothered the world beneath him, binding Gaia with the weight of his endless presence. Cronus answered not with words, but with emotion that remade the horizon. The moment the blow fell, the boundless sky recoiled, retreating upward, leaving Earth uncovered for the first time. Creation took on distance. Between Earth and sky, space opened, space for air, for motion, for freedom. But the cost of that release was blood scattered across the universe. The Greeks believed that divine blood carried generative power. It could not simply vanish. It created anew wherever it fell. As Uranus cried out, drops of his blood struck the ground. From those crimson seeds arose new beings, forces of vengeance, of strength, of wild vitality. The giants rose first, towering embodiments of natural fury. Then came the Furies, spirits who pursued the guilty and punished oath-breakers, their existence a reminder that harm never ends cleanly. Every drop landing on Gaia became a life, a witness to both the birth of justice and the persistence of violence. Even the severed part of Uranus did not disappear into nothingness. Cast into the sea, it churned the water into bright foam. From that foam, a figure began to form, the goddess Aphrodite, whose name carries the root for foam-born. Her emergence from an act of violation creates one of mythology's most complex reversals. Beauty born from brutality, desire separated from pain, yet still shadowed by it. If chaos began the world through yearning, Uranus's fall continued it through consequence. Creation now carried both light and red memory. This moment teaches the mythic rule of equilibrium. Every act produces its answer. Uranus's fall is not absolute defeat. His presence remains in the distance, shaping the boundaries of heaven. Gaia regains her breath, but she also inherits the stain of what has happened. The blood that fertilizes her soil is both gift and guilt. In other cultures, acts of creation often express harmony, a god speaking the world into being or shaping it with careful intent. The Greek account insists on paradox. The world expands through rupture. Renewal requires loss. Now freed from his father's shadow, Cronus gathered his siblings and declared a new age. The Titans rose to power, shaping mountains and rivers, defining the contours of the world. The air cleared of tension, and a sense of stillness spread. For the first time, light moved unbroken from sky to sea. This era would be remembered as the Golden Age, a time when life flourished, when nature's gifts seemed to pour from every corner of the earth. Yet beneath that abundance lingered a quiet unease. The act that brought freedom had also taught fear. Cronus's hand still held the sickle, a reminder of what he had done and what could be done again. He learned from his father's mistake the wrong lesson. Where Uranus controlled by confinement, Cronus ruled by uncertainty. He understood the danger of heirs better than anyone because his own ascension proved the pattern. Power once taken by force would always be vulnerable to a similar blow. Even as the Titans built their dominion, a prophecy whispered through the halls of heaven. One of Cronus's children would overthrow him as he had overthrown his father. That prophecy shaped his every breath. In it we hear the mythic beginning of cyclical fortune, a truth the Greeks saw everywhere, from seasons to empires. No rule lasts unchanged. Cronus, refusing to accept that rhythm, turned anxiety into policy. His rule became one of maintenance, not expansion. The world was fertile under his command, but development halted at satisfaction. The abundance of the Golden Age felt effortless, but it carried a strange stillness, as though even the wind feared to shift direction. This is the moral inversion at the heart of his story. Peace founded on fear is not true peace. Cronus, having risen from rebellion, now governed as its potential victim. His authority relied on memory, the constant dread of reversal. Every seed planted in the age of plenty also hid the pattern of decline. The world, though stable, began to hum with suppressed motion, an echo of the pressure Gaia once felt inside her. What the myth suggests is that violence never ends with bloodshed. It transforms into tension. The cosmos, now aware of consequence, could no longer return to innocence. The act that divided heaven and earth also taught the gods about accountability. The new generation could no longer claim creation as pure blessing. Each choice carried debt. The Furies existed to remind them of that, unseen but ever-present enforcers, born out of cosmic wrongdoing. Their presence ensured that divine power came with limits. In this way, the myth introduces the idea of justice not as an external law, but as the world's own corrective pulse. Aphrodite, on the other hand, embodied the restorative countercurrent. Born from the sea, she transformed pain into attraction, separation into union. Her arrival balanced the ugliness of struggle with the possibility of beauty, yet even she could not erase the violence that birthed her. The Greeks read this duality as truth. The same forces that tear apart the world make it capable of love. Desire, vengeance, fertility, and fear are threads woven from the same origin. Life continues because each needs the others. When we step back to consider what Cronus achieved, it appears that he didn't invent harmony, but inherited disorder in a polished form. The Titans organized the cosmos, assigning functions to elements, maintaining cycles of day and night. But control is never perfect. The shadow of the prophecy darkened every success. Cronus fathered children with Rhea, his sister and queen, yet each birth filled him with suspicion. The prophecy, though not yet fulfilled, had already taken root in his mind. He ruled the world outwardly in splendor, while inwardly haunted by what prophecy demanded. The world under Cronus glowed with the hue of harvest, yet something in that glow flickered. The people of later ages would remember it as an idol, but even mythology admits its cracks. The Golden Age is rarely described in motion. It sits suspended, a pause before the next descent. That timelessness is the sign of fear, disguised as perfection. Cronus sought permanence, but permanence in a living world always decays into stagnation. The same pattern repeats. Power solidifies, suppresses, and invites its undoing. So when storytellers describe his throne gleaming above the Titans, that image contains irony. The sickle he once used to free his mother was also the emblem of reaping, cutting down what has grown too full. Cronus became both creator and destroyer of his own peace. Through him, the universe learned the price of victory. Whoever gains control must answer for how it was taken. The cosmos, newly aware of consequence, could no longer pretend that change was optional. What the Greeks offered through this story was not a warning against ambition, but an acknowledgement of recurrence, the inevitability of cycles. Cronus looked across his ordered realm and tried to believe in its permanence. He crowned himself ruler of time itself, naming the sequence of growth and harvest as his domain. Yet beneath every clock tick of mythic ages beat the same pulse of reversal. The prophecy grew louder with every life he created. Even as he claimed the Golden Age as his reward, he was already standing on its edge. The one thing he could not govern was destiny. His attempt to secure eternity would soon drive him to the act that ends all stillness, devouring what he fears most. How does one hold on to power when destiny itself becomes the enemy? Every ruler fears the prophecy that names his end. Cronus tried to eat his solution. From the very moment he took his father's throne, he lived under the shadow of that whisper. A child of his blood would rise against him one day. It was the same warning Uranus had once ignored, now reborn as destiny's echo. For a time, Cronus believed he had broken the pattern. The Titans ruled a stable, shining world, and the season of plenty seemed infinite. But prophecy is the one opponent a god cannot bind. Gaia and Uranus, his own parents, breathed the warning into being, and the fear planted there grew like a thorn in his mind. When the first of his children was born, that fear became motion. Cronus looked down at the baby and saw not innocence, but threat. His answer was swift and merciless. He took the child from Rhea's arms and swallowed it whole. He believed that what entered his body would lose its shape, that by consuming life, he could erase destiny itself. Yet every act meant to secure control only deepened his dependence on fear. The gesture repeated with every birth, second, third, fourth, fifth, until the palace of the Titans became a place of mourning. Life itself was turned inward, devoured at its beginning. Rhea, his sister and queen, endured this horror in silence at first. She had seen the same cycle before, the ruler who smothers what threatens him, the mother who bears the cost. For the gods, time is not linear. It curves back on itself, repeating the mistakes of creation until someone dares to act differently. Rhea's pain grew sharper with every child lost to Cronus's hunger. The golden age that surrounded them only made the cruelty more surreal. Fields overflowed, rivers sang with clarity, and yet the very house of heaven was hollow, echoing with the absence of its future. The age of abundance became an age of consumption, a banquet of loss. When Rhea became pregnant once more, she turned to Gaia for guidance. The earth had endured suppression before. She recognized the smell of tyranny. The two plotted a quiet counterforce not through swords or blades, but through care. Rebellion would not come as murder this time. It would come as preservation. Rhea resolved that this sixth child would live. her mother's instinct became divine strategy. When labor came, she slipped away into secrecy, far from Cronus's gaze, and brought forth Zeus beneath the shrouded night. Cronus, impatient and suspicious, demanded to see the infant. Rhea presented a stone wrapped tightly in swaddling cloth, its smooth weight fooling the god, too consumed by fear to notice the deception. Without hesitation, he swallowed it. The illusion worked because dread blunts discernment. Cronus's appetite was for reassurance, not nourishment. In that single moment, Rhea rewrote the method of rebellion. She did not strike or wound, she withheld. Her act of protection broke the pattern of violence that had defined divine succession until then. In quiet defiance, she turned maternal love into the most effective weapon yet seen in myth. Hidden far from the shining palaces, Zeus drew his first breaths. Some tales place his cradle in a mountain cave where nymphs and spirits tended him. Others say he grew beneath the earth, the hum of Gaia herself rocking him to sleep. However the old poets told it, the thread remains constant. He was raised in secrecy, nourished by those who remembered Gaia's grief and feared the stagnation of the Titans' rule. The world above may have glittered, but below, a new rhythm was forming, a heartbeat of revolt couched in innocence. That upbringing held meaning beyond its secrecy. While Cronus looked inward, consumed by his own empire, Zeus grew outward, learning the balance of wild nature and hidden order. He was shaped by the landscape that sheltered him, absorbing from Gaia the quiet patience his grandfather lacked, and from Rhea the intelligence to act without cruelty. In that sense, he became not only the next heir, but the product of synthesis, the joining of endurance and strategy. The paradox at the center of Cronus's rule now fully revealed itself. The Golden Age gave every appearance of security, yet its ruler's fear hollowed out the core of creation. It was an empire devouring itself, abundance collapsing under its own excess. The myth, when told by later generations, served as lesson and lament. Power founded on consumption can only shrink. Cronus had released the world from the tyranny of sky, only to reproduce that same oppression in another form. His tyranny was quieter, but just as suffocating, a cycle of swallowing that left no room for growth. Across these stories, we can trace a simple progression. Uranus trapped life inside the earth, and Cronus trapped life inside himself. Suppression merely changed shape. The cycle would continue until a form of leadership emerged that allowed the world to breathe. Zeus's survival carried the potential for that reform, yet his rise would still require confrontation. Myth never spares its heroes the burden of battle. Rhea's courage stands as the hinge of this entire transformation. Without her, the chain of fear would have stretched endlessly. By saving her child, she preserved more than a life. She safeguarded the principle of renewal itself. Her defiance exemplifies a subtler kind of strength, one rooted in foresight rather than force. Through her, the feminine archetype in Greek myth shifts from passive bearer to active guardian. Her alliance with Gaia signals that rebellion, once embodied by fury and blood, can also take the form of nurture, patience, and calculation. Meanwhile, Cronus continued to rule, unaware that his imagined victory had already begun to dissolve. Within his belly, the swallowed children remained trapped, their divine essence undigested, awaiting release. Myth shows that even the mightiest cannot digest consequence. Every swallowed moment of life accumulates, pressing for return. Cronus, the devourer of time, carried time's resistance within. As Zeus grew, the world began to prepare alongside him. The balance of nature shifted subtly. The harmony of ages showed cracks. Where Titans once moved mountains, now their movement slowed. The promise of inevitability wavered. Rhea's secret increasingly resembled prophecy fulfilled in reverse. The child meant to end his father's reign was not yet a warrior. He was the patience of nature maturing into clarity. He would reclaim not only the throne, but the principle of rightful succession, order without suppression. Mythologists often saw Zeus's upbringing as a mirror to human cycles. The hidden child represents innovation waiting beneath the weight of tradition. Sooner or later, what is buried in fear must resurface. For Cronus, this would occur not through divine accident, but through the very balance he sought to break. Every generation corrects the one before it. Every authority raises the conditions of its successor. When Zeus finally came of age, the cosmos felt the tremor of transition. And so, the age of devouring began to end, giving way to an age of reckoning. Zeus would return to confront his father, not with the vengeance of Uranus's revolt, but with a sense of justice shaped by memory. He would free his siblings from within Cronus, restoring what had been consumed, and proving that creation cannot be permanently confined. That act, once it arrives, will ignite the greatest conflict yet known to myth, the Titanomachy, a war waged not only for power, but for the definition of order itself. The rebellion born beneath the world is ready to rise, armed not by hatred alone, but by understanding that no ruler, no matter how fearful, can forever silence the will of time. And from that realization, Zeus will seek allies and forge the instruments that will mark the dawn of a new cosmos. What does it take to fight gods who built the world? A secret alliance beneath the earth had the answer. When Zeus came of age, the memory of his father's tyranny still pulsed through the roots of the cosmos. Cronus had swallowed his children, chained his rivals, and silenced the elemental forces that had once given life its spark. Deep underground, those forces remained alive, buried, bitter, and waiting. Zeus had freed himself from the cycle of devouring, but ruling a broken world would take more than courage. He needed allies from the forgotten deep. The Cyclopes were the first he sought. Long ago, they had forged the bones of mountains and the breath of fire. Cronus, fearing their power, had locked them in Tartarus, a chamber so deep that even light hesitated to enter. Zeus's arrival broke that quiet sentence. He descended into the hollow places where sound hung heavy and called their names. What mattered wasn't strength, but trust. He recognized what his father never had, that power grows when it is shared. The ancient forges flared again, heat answering tone as the Cyclopes recognized a ruler who sought creation, not suppression. The 100-handed ones, the Hecatonchires, followed. Their size and fury had terrified Uranus and Cronus alike, beings of impossible scale who could hurl mountains as if they were stones. Yet beneath their rage lay loyalty, buried under centuries of confinement. Zeus unbound their chains, not in pity, but in understanding that even chaos had a place in design. To build anything lasting, he needed strength that refused to break. Their gratitude was immediate and absolute. For the first time since creation itself, the oppressed began to side with a god who offered purpose instead of fear. That act of liberation became the foundation of the Olympian cause. Gratitude transformed into alliance, and gratitude has a way of inventing miracles. In the deepest forge of Tartarus, the Cyclopes began to repay Zeus's kindness through craft. Sparks leapt across the cavern walls, echoing like the heartbeat of the planet. Fire, once wild, took shape under their hands. They created the thunderbolt, an instrument not only of destruction, but of declaration. When it struck, it did not merely burn, it announced order. Thunder, they said, would give command. It was the voice of authority that rolled across mountains, gathering attention before speech even followed. Lightning, sharper and swifter, would serve as justice, instant, precise, impossible to escape. Storm itself would be consequence, the natural chain between act and outcome. Each gift carried a principle. The Cyclopes reminding Zeus that rule must reflect the structure of nature, sound before pulse, strike before calm, rain after release. In their designs, power and ethics were fused. Every weapon represented a rule. The work went beyond metallurgy. What took shape in that infernal light was closer to philosophy than warfare. You can think of it as the world's first technology, raw elements harnessed into symbols of control and restraint. The hammer's rhythm echoed the reason at Zeus's core. Power could be used to bind or balance, and true mastery was knowing when to unleash it. The Cyclopes carved this lesson into the thunderhead itself, ensuring that every storm would remember its maker. Zeus learned the value of creation over consumption. His father's sickness had been hunger, devouring what he feared to lose. Zeus inverted that principle. He accepted help, acknowledging that strength isn't singular. Even his new armor, said to shimmer like condensed sky, was built through collaboration. The 100-handed ones guarded the gates while the Cyclopes shaped divinity into form. Each was part of a larger system, a network of forces rediscovered through cooperation. The cosmos, once ruled by isolation, finally began to act as a whole. Think of this as a generational repair. The sons of Cronus had inherited a fractured world, and Zeus's alliance stitched it back together through exchange of craft and knowledge. Across their tunnels, the old chaos found purpose. Fire ceased to be mere consumption. It became refinement. It taught that even destructive force can clarify rather than erase. The forges hissed with lessons older than the gods themselves, that every tool mirrors the hand that wields it, and morality depends on use. When the Cyclopes lifted the completed thunderbolt toward Zeus, the scene wasn't triumph. It was covenant. They were handing him the distilled law of cause and effect. With it came the promise of consequence for all, including the god who held it. For perhaps the first time in myth, power carried accountability. Lightning would never strike without echo. That balance would later define Olympus, where every judgment carried return. The stories say Zeus tested the gift at once. He cast a bolt into the distance, and where it struck, new air roared into being. It didn't destroy, it purified. The ground beneath shuddered, but the silence that followed felt clean, as though order had gained a sound of its own. From that moment, thunder became a language, and storms became conversations between heaven and earth. In these recurring dialogues, mortals later heard not anger, but presence. The alliance beneath the world did more than arm a single god. It redefined divinity. Zeus's leadership flowed from shared intelligence. The Cyclopes and Hecatonchires had lived through every failure of creation. They knew what unchecked authority could do. By freeing them, Zeus didn't just win supporters, he gained advisors who embodied the memory of cosmic injustice. Through their aid, he tempered his ambition with reflection. He learned that dominance alone repeats tyranny, but structure channels it into stewardship. Each weapon, each strike of forging, stood as proof that order could coexist with freedom. The thunder symbolized communication, rule that declares itself before acting. Lightning stood for precision, judgment that cuts cleanly without indulgence. The storm symbolized aftermath, the reminder that all actions ripple outward. Together, they translated chaos into rhythm. Every storm after this, every roll of thunder could be heard as the echo of those principles colliding. The forging scene, though never fully detailed by the old poets, invites us to see creation itself as a moral act. Metal bent under intention becomes image, and through that, myth encodes philosophy. Zeus didn't seize his tools. They were given through collaboration, a reminder that responsible rule depends on consent as much as might. This transformation marks a pivot in every version of the tale. The cosmos moves from inheritance by violence to governance by alliance. The 100-handed ones joined him next, standing like living fortresses at his side. Their loyalty sealed the pact between order and strength. They were chaos in disciplined form, energy directed outward, no longer buried. Having freed them, Zeus earned their obedience not through fear, but through recognition. They would soon become the decisive force capable of turning worlds when the Great War began. The air itself seemed to brace for motion, as though the earth remembered what rebellion sounded like. Zeus, still young, yet already commanding, stood amidst his allies and felt the convergence of generations. The artisans of old, the siblings once devoured, the powers newly liberated. Through their union, he glimpsed a different way to lead. His authority would not rest on confinement like Uranus or on gluttony like Cronus. It would lean on structure, reciprocity, and oath. The gifts forged in Tartarus were less weapons than reminders that every strike must carry meaning. That lesson defined him. Standing beneath the wide mouth of the cavern, Zeus raised his hand, and the air responded. The Cyclopes bowed not in submission, but in fellowship. A leader had finally emerged who could translate necessity into harmony. In mythic time, this was the dawn before war, the breath held before the cry. The Olympians finally gathered, prepared to rise toward the heavens. They carried with them thunder's authority, lightning's precision, and the storm's inevitability. For them, creation was no longer something to fear, it was something to wield. And so, armed with gratitude turned into craft, the newfound gods stepped from darkness into contest. The world had learned collaboration through struggle, and now it would test what that collaboration could withstand. For 10 long years ahead, fire and stone would meet again, shaking the roots of existence until a new order stood clear beneath the thunder's light. For Greeks, the first real war wasn't fought by humans. It was a cosmic civil war waged by family. The Titanomachy began when the quiet tension between father and son finally erupted into open conflict. By then, Zeus had grown into a leader whose strength came not from age or inheritance, but from conviction and alliance. He had freed his siblings from Cronus' stomach, restoring those once devoured: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. And together they formed the first council of what would become the Olympian order. On the other side stood Cronus, still king, holding fast to the power he had claimed by force. Around him gathered the Titans, elder gods of immense weight and endurance, their loyalty bound more by habit than harmony. The world they had shaped trembled under their division. The two sides represented opposing principles. The Titans fought for memory, for the dominion of permanence. They believed creation belonged to those who had first labored it into being. The Olympians fought for renewal, for a chance to remake what fear and repression had twisted. The battlefield wasn't merely sky or stone. It was existence itself. The clash of generations rippled through every element. Mountains shifted, seas boiled, and the heavens burned with light never seen before. For 10 years, neither side yielded. Every dawn broke to new thunder. Every night fell on smoldering earth. The old poets described it as storm against mountain. The Titans hurled rocks that could crush ranges, while Zeus answered with bolts that split the air open. Each strike carved new geography into the world. Valleys formed where the Titans fell. Lakes filled the hollows left by shattered peaks. The war itself became the raw process of creation, chaos shaping order through conflict. There was no clean distinction between weapon and world. Each blow gave birth to new terrain. Even the air seemed alive, heavy with the smell of ozone and stone dust. The scale was so immense that time seemed to slow. Years passed like days to those watching from mortal distance. Zeus commanded not as a solitary god, but as a strategist balancing divine temperaments. He didn't inherit obedience, he earned it. Unlike Cronus, who ruled by possession, Zeus guided his siblings by trust. Hestia tended to sacrificial flame so that every victory could be honored. Hera kept alliances among the divine families intact. Poseidon learned to shape the ocean's turbulence into a tool of offense, sending waves to strike at titanic strongholds. Hades, quietest of all, studied endurance, ensuring their army could outlast attrition. Each took responsibility for an element of existence, dividing labor rather than hoarding it. Zeus's command style mirrored the very order he hoped to install. Power arranged through cooperation, not suppression. Cronus's ranks were older, heavier with ancient might. Titans like Iapetus, Coeus, and Hyperion fought beside him, wielding the raw, untamed forces of the forming cosmos. Their defense was monumental but rigid. They were rooted beings, carved from the first matter of the world. When they struck, their blows were like earthquakes. When they fell, mountains vanished. Cronus himself fought with the same sickle that had once unmade his father, but his grip had changed. Fear dulled what ambition once sharpened. His battle cries sounded more like denial than command. The Titan army held the early advantage through sheer mass of being, but the Olympians carried speed, newness, adaptability, and intellect shaped through suffering. The war might have lasted forever if not for the return of the hundred-handed ones. Zeus, remembering his allies beneath the world, called for them when the tide turned against him. From the darkness of Tartarus, they rose again, like memories too vast to contain. Each of the three giants towered beyond reckoning, their 100 arms moving faster than sight, their 50 heads shouting commands that echoed across continents. They were chaos turned cooperative, a lesson in what Zeus alone could inspire, harmony among what was once unmanageable. Their strength broke the stalemate. They stood beside the Olympians, hurling giant stones, fragments of creation's first body, until even the Titans began to falter. The sound of their assault was said to match that of thunder itself. Storms rolled not only above, but within the earth. Cronus and his army resisted with ancient intensity, yet they were losing ground to movement, precision, and change. The world during those years existed in dual form, flame and shadow, destruction and shaping intertwined. Wherever Zeus's lightning struck, new order followed. The universe, by its own rage, was remembering stability through pattern. What this shows is that the Titanomachy was less a contest of weapons and more a confrontation between systems. The Titans embodied inheritance, rule by right of origin, while the Olympians represented adaptation, rule by competence and alliance. The victory of Zeus's host revealed that divinity itself was evolving, no longer static. It could reorganize, respond, and self-correct. The cosmic order to come would not derive from a single lineage, but from necessity and cooperation. Myth records this shift not as accident, but as realization. Creation endures only when leadership learns to share. When the final chains of thunder fell quiet, the outcome was complete. The Titans stood defeated, their reign broken. Zeus ordered the 100-handed ones to bind them in Tartarus, the same abyss they had once guarded, far below even the roots of the underworld. This imprisonment was more than punishment. It was a boundary. The Titans were too fundamental to destroy. Their essence formed the raw material of being. By sealing them away, Zeus ensured that chaos remained contained, but not forgotten. Their confinement marked the first political act of the New Age, order preserving disorder as a lesson, not as erasure. It mirrored the principle that strength requires opposition to know itself. The end of the war brought exhaustion and clarity. Zeus and his allies stood amid a world reshaped by conflict. Mountains no longer reached all the way to heaven. The spaces carved by battle created breathable distance between realms. The sky stretched higher, the seas deeper, the land more stable. In mythic logic, every scar became infrastructure. The world's geography itself testified to the cost of stability. And as silence settled over the new landscape, authority had to be defined. There could be no single ruler who consumed his subjects again, but neither could there be endless equality. A framework was needed, something resembling government, drawn from lessons in alliance. Symbolically, the Titanomachy represents the triumph of a new, more ordered, albeit still flawed, political structure over primal chaos and tyrannical rule. It reminds us that divine order was not divinely ordained from the start, but was forged through necessity, conflict, and strategic alliances. The very hierarchy that mortals would later pray to began here, not as inheritance, but as constitution, a network of roles negotiated through warfare. What started as rebellion transformed into blueprint. Once the Titans were cast down, Zeus turned to his siblings to decide the shape of peace. The victory required distribution, not possession. Who would rule the height of the heavens? Who the restless water? Who the unseen depths? This was not mere division of spoils, but a continuation of the principle they had fought for: shared governance. The war's conclusion thus became its beginning, the foundation of cosmic order emerging directly from the memory of conflict. The gods, hardened by the longest decade of mythic time, understood that victory meant responsibility. Power gained through cooperation required that it stay cooperative. Still, beneath their triumph pulsed an unspoken question. The fight had taught them what unity could do in desperation, but could that unity survive peace? Cronus had won once under the same promise before surrendering to fear. Zeus now faced the ongoing burden of maintaining balance in a world vast enough for rivalry to return. The first real war among gods had ended. The universe was stable, yet aware of fragility. The heavens were open, the seas restless, the earth scarred yet firm. Out of fire and stone, the Olympians had forged both hierarchy and history. The cosmos rested for the first time since chaos had breathed it into motion. The Titans' roars faded into the underground depths, echoing like memory. Above them, a new divine generation looked upon the still-smoking horizon and understood what creation demanded: continuity born of clash. War had become law, and law needed borders. The gods prepared to draft them, to decide who would keep the sky, who the sea, and who the final realm beneath. The titanomachy had ended, but politics had only just begun as the brothers of the New Age gathered to draw the first lines of heaven and hell. After victory, the gods faced their hardest question: who gets what in a universe with no map? The war had ended, the fire had cooled, the sky, sea, and underworld still trembled with the echoes of battle. Yet silence brought a new kind of tension, the question of ownership. When everything exists because of divine conflict, how do you decide its borders? Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades stood together on the new ground, each aware that the next decision could bind peace or start another war. They had fought side by side, but victory meant drawing lines between brothers. The old order was gone. The Titans were locked beneath the earth, and the world needed balance. No single god could govern all creation without repeating Cronus's mistake. The three sons of that devoured age understood what unchecked rule could do. So they agreed not to divide by power, but by chance. The lot would decide. It was an oath of equality, a divine form of restraint. Each brother placed his hand over the same pot, knowing that what emerged would define eternity. Zeus drew first, the sky. With that, he became ruler of the visible world, a presence both distant and intimate. His domain stretched over everything. Clouds, air, and storms became his symbols. Rule over the sky meant rule over law itself, the ability to see all without touching all. His lightning, born in rebellion, now symbolized judgment rather than revolt. From above, he watched the world with the perspective of distance, yet distance comes at a cost. His throne gave him oversight, but also isolation. Law, after all, must stand apart to function. Poseidon's turn followed. His realm took the form of the sea, the restless mirror between worlds. The oceans carried both promise and threat. They could unite distant lands or swallow them whole. Poseidon's rule represented unpredictability, a constant reminder that even gods could not tame emotion or nature entirely. His trident wasn't simply a weapon, it was a symbol of motion, breaking and mending the waves. He governed a landscape that never stood still, embodying a power that could be generous one moment and merciless the next. To the Greeks, this balance captured how creation breathes, always in flux, never entirely calm. Hades drew last. The underworld fell to him, a domain that was neither curse nor exile, but foundation. He became keeper of permanence, the aspect of reality that endures after all change. The underworld was not only a place of the dead, but of memory, the structure upon which new life depends. To rule it meant to hold everything that has been. His crown was silence, his wealth the endless resource of what no longer returns. Even though mortals would later fear his name, the oldest poets described Hades as necessary balance, a correction against the boundless hunger of the living world above. These three realms, sky, sea, and underworld, formed a triad that held the universe in motion. What this means is that creation finally gained balance, not through conquest, but through division that acknowledged interdependence. None of these realms could exist without the others. Air needed space above and below. Water needed depth to flow into, and the earth in between depended on both for fertility and renewal. Still, the arrangement came with fragility. Each brother understood his limits, but limits demand discipline. Their unity rested not on affection, but on oath. In the wake of war, oaths became the only stable currency of trust. Zeus's oath as Sky Lord placed him in constant watch. The heavens were both throne and promise, clear when peace held, storming when rules broke. His visibility gave assurance that law was seen, not hidden. The mortals who would come later understood this intuitively. They looked upward for order. From Zeus, visibility became rule. Governance ceased to be a secret act and became spectacle. Yet the very quality that defined his realm, clarity, made him the god most capable of envy. His omnipresence sometimes turned into suspicion, for a ruler who sees all must decide how much to let unfold on its own. Poseidon's waters told a different story. His rule meant movement through uncertainty. While Zeus embodied the fixed law of heaven, Poseidon embodied the law of change. His realm served as both barrier and bridge. The Greeks saw him as moody, reflective of storms within and without. Yet his unpredictability preserved balance. Without his shifting seas, life would stagnate. Without his tempests, renewal would cease. Under Poseidon's trident stretched the emotional logic of the universe. That creation thrives only through rhythm. Hades, for his part, accepted the quietest command. He chose stability over spectacle. To reside in absence, to guard what no longer breathes, takes a different kind of strength. His underworld became the moral anchor of the cosmos, ensuring that energy always returned to form. Mortals might fear him, but their worship carried respect. Death ensures that life retains meaning. The Greeks viewed this as moral symmetry, light defined by shadow, rule defined by restraint. Under Hades' governance, permanence gained dignity. Through this tripartite division, hierarchy became network. Zeus ruled law, Poseidon commanded movement, Hades guarded completion. What this shows is that sovereignty in myth evolves into symbiosis. No god could dominate the others without collapsing what they shared. When lightning strikes the sea, the event joins both rather than separates them. When an earthquake opens the ground, all three realms touch for an instant. The old poets might have seen in that moment the divine reminder that power must circulate, not accumulate. One detail carries quiet brilliance. Despite all the divisions, Gaia remained untouched. The earth itself, source of all, belonged to none. She existed as neutral ground, the space-binding sky, sea, and underworld together. No god could claim her as domain, only as dwelling. That freedom preserved balance. It meant life had a common home beyond jurisdiction. The permanence of Gaia protected creation from absolute control. Her neutrality was the constitution beneath the Olympian government. In dividing the world, the brothers also divided roles within themselves. Zeus became vision, Poseidon motion, Hades memory. The unity they forged was conditional, held by promise and mutual awareness. Even minor imbalance among them could shatter equilibrium. The myths that followed often begin at moments when one realm oversteps another, storms flooding the land, or mortals haunting the borders of death. These stories keep retelling one truth. Peace, in both divine and mortal worlds, requires constant maintenance. Every thunderhead, every tide, every echo from beneath reminded mortals that cosmic law was not passive. The division of realms mirrored the order of justice. Above, Zeus watched through clarity. Between, Poseidon roared through passion. Below, Hades waited with reflection. Law, feeling, and memory, three dimensions of governance disguised as geography. The Greeks saw no contradiction here. They believed a balanced world needed both impulse and restraint, both sky's gaze and the sea's changeable heart. The fragile unity of this structure lay in trust. When Zeus swore upon the Styx, a sacred river connecting all realms, no god dared break that word. Oaths became the binding fabric of heaven and hell alike. They linked divine moral law to the natural order, suggesting that ethics itself was elemental. To violate an oath endangered the cosmos as surely as shaking the foundations of Earth or tearing open the sea. Even the gods feared that consequence. This division did more than end a war. It invented boundaries through which existence could flow. The heavens became a realm of thought, the sea a realm of motion, and the underworld a realm of inevitability. Together, they drew the first functional map of reality. The age of unstructured power was over. The gods now worked within a design, imperfect but durable. The Olympian government, as later myths called it, began with this accord. It marked the shift from strength to regulation, from chaos to rhythm. The beauty of this story lies in its tension. The world didn't settle into quiet harmony, it hovered in balance. The same brothers who divided creation would test each other's borders. Poseidon's tempest would challenge Zeus's skies. Hades's stillness would lure mortals meant to remain above, and Zeus's authority would stretch again and again until it cracked under ambition. But for now, the cosmos stood organized, each realm resonating with purpose. Creation had finally been given structure, a home of sky, sea, and shadow bound by oath and necessity. Through this arrangement, existence became accountable. What began in chaos had learned the art of boundary. The Olympian constitution was written not in stone or text, but in the space between forces, each depending on the others to remain alive. The world could now breathe evenly. Order had arrived, steady yet vulnerable. And as it settled into place, the next truth waited just beyond reach. When structure appears, challenge follows, testing whether law can hold against the will that created it. The gods won control, but keeping peace required something stronger than weapons: trust. When thunder stopped echoing after the Titan War, Zeus learned that a universe kept by mere strength would always slide back into fear. The old rule of domination had been broken. Now it needed to be replaced by principle. Victory had built the world's shape, but it couldn't hold its heart together. So Zeus turned to something intangible yet unbreakable: oaths. These became the new architecture of the cosmos, invisible threads connecting divine will to moral law. Zeus's first act as ruler wasn't to brandish the thunderbolt, it was to bind himself by promise. In doing so, he transformed divine power into responsibility. The gods could still act as forces of nature, but their authority now carried expectation. Law wasn't a prison, it was the rhythm that made countless wills function together. Every storm, wave, or harvest would unfold according to divine harmony, and that harmony rested on trust. Without it, power dissolved into chaos again. Think of this as the moment when the cosmos began to speak in terms of justice. The Greeks named it Dike, the spirit of fairness, and Themis, the keeper of order. Under their guidance, Zeus's reign became more than rulership, it became governance. Dike measured actions against balance, ensuring that force aligned with purpose. Themis embodied the structure that held divine society together, a law rooted in custom, oath, and rightful proportion. Through them, Zeus ruled not by fear, but by standard. His thunderbolts no longer struck at random. They enforced these unseen metrics. Every god was now answerable to that moral frame. Even immortality did not exempt them from consequence. To swear falsely or to break an oath was to crack the very world they had struggled to form. The most sacred vow was sworn upon the Styx, the river that wound between the living world and the underworld. When a god invoked the Styx, they weren't appealing to sentiment. They were binding themselves to the lifeblood of creation, If the promise was broken, the punishment was inevitable. The offender would be bound in silence, exiled from divine company for years beyond reckoning, stripped of nectar and ambrosia, the foods of eternal life. That fear of cosmic accountability kept even the boldest gods cautious. Authority had developed a conscience. Zeus himself was not above this system. He participated in it. By vowing upon the Styx as others did, he showed that governance required example. What this means is that leadership turned from spectacle to stewardship. The thunder in the clouds was no longer only the sound of anger. It was the reminder of order, reminding itself to stay balanced. Across myths, we see moments when these oaths define divine behavior. When gods quarrel over pride or passion, they step back only when reminded of the Styx. The very landscape of the world became enforcement. Rivers, winds, and seasons acted as instruments of law. Hesiod later described Dike walking the earth, watching over mortals, carrying their complaints to Zeus. That image serves as metaphor, the idea that justice is not remote but migratory, crossing between the divine and human realms. The justice that governed gods became the same principle mortals would slowly try to imitate. The parallels to human rule are deliberate. As city-states developed councils and courts, storytellers projected those systems upward. The gods, though mighty, mirrored human dilemmas: how to maintain fairness, how to contain envy, how to ensure that victory does not corrupt. By watching the divine behave under law, people learned that cosmic order and social order relied on the same premise: agreement honored more than authority feared. This relationship between heaven and polis gave meaning to worship. To respect Zeus wasn't just to fear his lightning, but to live within the proportions his justice prescribed. The Styx oath worked much like natural law does for us today. It stood as an unchanging constant that even the highest power could not rewrite. The Greeks found comfort in that limitation. A world where gods also answered to principle offered predictability. Thunder might surprise you, but it would never be baseless. Even storms bore meaning. They were corrections, not tantrums. That assurance let mortals build confidence in their moral experiments. If law stemmed from divinity, then following it aligned humanity with the cosmos. In the stories that followed, every divine judgment carries its echo. When Apollo defends sanctuary, when Athena settles disputes, when Hermes tricks yet obeys consequence, all act under the larger canopy of Zeus's law. Dike measures each gesture, Themis maintains procedure. Together they shape the cosmos into something recognizably ethical. You could say that myth begins to teach philosophy here. Justice is not invention, it is recognition. It means aligning action with the balance of the universe rather than the noise of impulse. Zeus's commitment to law marked a subtle transformation of his character. As a warrior, he conquered. As king, he organized. But as judge, he stabilized. His rule moved from momentary force to enduring influence. The thunderbolt became a symbol not of destruction, but of verdict. It punished arrogance, yes, but it also affirmed integrity. When Zeus acts as judge, the cosmos listens. Decisions made under his name align creation itself. They shape seasons, fertility, and fate. His governance does not crush chaos. It channels it. In this way, the cosmos ceased to be ruled by strength alone. Order no longer depended on who could throw the louder thunder. It depended on who could uphold the truer word. Law turned the divine hierarchy into a working system. Gods didn't only serve as elements, they became administrators of cosmic principles. The old world born from fear matured into a network of responsibility. You can think of it like the shift from raw energy to harmony and music. Strength provides sound. Law provides rhythm. Without rhythm, even brilliance becomes noise. The Greek world gathered that insight from its myths. They saw that oaths stitched reality together, each promise reinforcing structure. Breaking one was not a minor betrayal. It was like snapping a string in the fabric of existence. That image of interwoven accountability informed later philosophy, where reason and justice were paired as reflections of divine order. The strictness of oath and consequence also framed morality for mortals. If gods bound themselves, what excuse could humanity have for deceit? The link between divine and human ethics became contractual. Cities swore civic oaths that mirrored heavenly ones. Citizens invoked Zeus Horkios, guardian of promises. Festivals honored not conquest, but covenant. The cosmos, once shaped by rebellion, now celebrated reliability. This transformation added something profound to the mythic landscape: sympathy. When even gods could falter under law, they became recognizably flawed. Their punishments and reconciliations modeled humility to audiences who lived under fluctuating fates. Justice was no longer abstract, it had personality and consequence. Dike smiled upon right action. Themis frowned on chaos disguised as courage. Through them, Zeus turned moral choice into cosmic participation. Acting justly became a way to keep the world in tune. By grounding power in law, Zeus also opened the gates for new kinds of stories. Strength had settled. Meaning began. Heroes would now rise not just to fight monsters, but to interpret divine will through ethical decision. The Olympian era became a classroom for mortals learning responsibility. Behind every legend, the trials of Heracles, the cunning of Odysseus, the fairness of judges, stands this invisible reform. Law became the bridge between Olympus and Earth. The world, newly ordered, pulsed with a sense of permanence. Each vow spoken by god or mortal alike echoed that prime rule. Balance sustains existence. Yet even in stability, friction lingers. The myths remind us that harmony invites challenge, commitment invites defiance. The same morality that steadies creation will soon awaken dissent in another form. The next great challenge to Zeus's law won't arrive from within the heavens, but from below, the spark of mortal curiosity and compassion that refuses silent obedience. And that spark has a name we already know: Prometheus. The first crack in Zeus's order came not from Titans, but from compassion for humankind. After the gods had divided the cosmos and sworn their oaths, the universe seemed finally at peace. Yet among the immortals was one who looked down upon the quiet figures on the earth, fragile, cold, and uncertain, and saw something incomplete. His name was Prometheus, a Titan who had fought beside Zeus in the Great War. He understood the gods' law, yet he cared for the mortals who lived beneath it. To him, humanity was not an accident, but an unfinished promise. And fire was the element they needed most. In the old stories, fire was more than warmth. It was divine energy itself. To possess it meant to shape the world rather than merely exist within it. Zeus, however, forbade its use. He saw in fire a power too close to the divine, an ability to create tools, craft shelter, cook food, and forge weapons. To give such a force to mortals, he believed, meant fracturing order, blurring the line between God and man. But Prometheus measured the matter differently. He saw the cold nights, the hunts done in darkness, the humans praying without answers. Compassion outweighed fear. So he ascended to the heavens, pierced the guard of Olympus, and carried back a spark hidden within a reed. When fire reached the earth, everything changed. Smoke rose for the first time. Light glowed where night had reigned, and the fragile beings of clay began to imitate the gods. They tempered metal, shaped art, and built homes that defied the storm. In mythic language, this was humanity's first technology, the birth of craft and symbol. Prometheus's gift turned survival into creation, but it also introduced risk. Fire burned as easily as it illuminated. It could forge a plow or a blade, could cook a feast or consume a field. Knowledge had entered the mortal world, indifferent to how it would be used. Zeus's anger arrived like a storm delayed but inevitable. His order had been violated, not through war nor deceit, but through pity. That made the act more dangerous. Rebellion born of ambition can be punished. Empathy is harder to contain. Prometheus had committed the first moral transgression against divine authority, a crime of compassion. He believed the gods' rule should serve creation, not restrain it. Zeus, for all his wisdom, read it as insubordination. To him, authority depended on boundaries, and Prometheus had erased one. The punishment that followed became legend. Prometheus was bound to a desolate mountain, chained in bronze that no mortal could cut. There, an eagle descended each day to feed upon his liver, which grew back every night. His torment was endless, not for cruelty's sake, but to illustrate a principle, that foresight, when defying law, bears an unending cost. His name itself means forethought, a quality as divine as it is rebellious. Bound by consequence, he embodied the tension between intellect and obedience, between mercy and justice. What this means is that the myth turns on a paradox. Prometheus acted from love, yet love itself threatened the cosmic order. Zeus had designed a system where each rule preserved the balance of heaven, sea, and underworld. But compassion for mortals introduced something unmeasurable, sympathy that ignored structure. Justice collided with mercy, and the result was contradiction. The mythology of this moment feels almost philosophical, the state punishing moral insight to keep order. Fire, in the Greek imagination, was never just flame. It symbolized knowledge shared before permission, power released before understanding. To steal it was to challenge divine oversight, the ancient equivalent of advancing too quickly. Prometheus's theft was an act of progress done without policy. The gods had created law. Humanity received freedom. For the first time, ignorance gave way to choice. The act anticipated civilization, but also conflict. Zeus's reaction reflects one of the oldest political dilemmas. How should authority treat innovation? Is defiance always a threat, or can it serve the system it breaks? His world had been built by rebellion. He himself had risen through revolt. Yet when another defied him, the principle felt different. By chaining Prometheus, Zeus drew the first line between divine governance and personal conscience. The new order, which claimed justice as its spine, now faced its first contradiction. Prometheus's agony wasn't only punishment, it was reminder. The gods could watch him suffering and remember the price of intervention. His body became a monument to foresight punished by power. Yet mortals, hearing the story, saw something else. They learned that the divine was fallible, that compassion might correct as well as endanger. This shift matters more than fire itself. The myth teaches that moral progress rarely begins with permission. If the lightning bolt had been Zeus's signal of enforcement, the stolen flame became humanity's sign of independence. Civilization would grow around it, both blessed and burdened. Fire lit temples and smelters, cities and wars. It reflected human choice, the first real evidence that mortals had inherited not just life, but decision. Through it, the boundary between divine and human dimmed. Each spark carried memory of rebellion, a tiny echo of Prometheus's defiance flickering in the hearth. Still, for Zeus, the matter was public law. Allowing the theft to stand unchecked would fracture his credibility, but destroying humanity outright would show tyranny. Instead, he sought equilibrium through demonstration. The punishment served both justice and caution. Prometheus's eternal suffering warned that compassion without discretion can burn as easily as it warms. Yet it also exposed Zeus's vulnerability. Even kings of heaven could be challenged on moral ground. This myth, therefore, reveals the first genuine test of the Olympian system, not against giants or chaos, but against conscience. Zeus was learning that enforcement without empathy breeds rebellion, while mercy without order breeds chaos. Between those two hung the future of both gods and humans. In this balance, Prometheus becomes less a villain or hero and more a mirror. His act asks whether progress can be governed and whether knowledge belongs to rulers or to all. Over time, storytellers recognize the irony. The Titan who foresaw everything had not foreseen his own suffering, while Zeus, the god of order, was forced to admit that rule cannot silence compassion forever. The myth's endurance lies in that mutual dependence. Each requires the other to stay meaningful. Prometheus gives humanity fire, and through it, culture. Zeus gives humanity limitations, so that culture must choose carefully how far to reach. Out of their conflict, freedom and law become entwined. Fire's dual nature, creation and destruction, became the defining theme of civilization itself. Every use of it carries a question. Will this warmth preserve or consume? The Greeks read that question into every tool and idea that followed. Fire, once stolen, never went out. It spread through human enterprise. Each invention, each insight, carried a shadow of that ancient theft. What Prometheus began as mercy became humanity's constant experiment with power. In mythic terms, the punishment lasted until a later age when a hero, descended from Zeus himself, would break the chains. But long before that, the story had already reshaped divine politics. The gods learned that rebellion could emerge not only from hatred, but from empathy. They discovered that order's greatest threat was not malice, but feeling. No thunderbolt could reverse that. Prometheus had introduced moral complexity into a previously simple cosmos. Through his suffering, humanity inherited a paradoxical gift: freedom bounded by consequence. To think, to create, to err. These became signatures of mortal life. The stolen flame became the soul of invention and the weight of accountability. Each generation would reenact the myth, inventing worlds and paying for them. The Prometheus story illuminates the eternal struggle between innovation and control. The ruler's dilemma repeated in every age. To encourage progress risks instability. To suppress it risks decay. The Greeks couched that political truth in divine form, but its echo remains familiar. Law must adapt, or it hardens into the very oppression it once opposed. From the first moment a human lifted a torch, Zeus's order had changed. The Olympian government, founded on balance, now possessed a citizen with agency. Humanity moved from obedience to participation. The gods could no longer shape the world alone. They now shared it with those who bore the fragment of their own fire. Zeus, unsettled but resolute, saw the need for a counterweight. The gift of fire had given mortals too much freedom, too much self-direction. An ungoverned power demanded a safeguard. To restore equilibrium, he conceived an answer both poetic and perilous: a figure forged by divine hands, crafted to hold within her the contradictions of hope and consequence. Her name would be Pandora, and through her, the gods would learn whether humanity could live with its gifts or destroy itself trying. To counter human power, Zeus crafted not a curse, but a gift with teeth. The theft of fire had tilted the balance of creation, and divine order needed correction. The gods could no longer control what humanity had learned, yet they could influence how it was used. They would not strike humanity down, but sculpt a new force to remind mortals that every gift carries a boundary. It would be wrapped in beauty, but stitched with consequence. From that resolve, Pandora was formed. Each god contributed a portion of their art to her making. Hephaestus molded her from clay, shaping a body so lifelike that even the winds paused to look. Athena clothed her and taught her skill, giving her the grace of learning and creation. Aphrodite bestowed charm, a magnetism that drew eyes and stirred curiosity. Hermes, quick and clever, breathed into her not malice, but restlessness, the impulse to question what she did not yet understand. Through that collaboration, she became the first woman, a living synthesis of divine attention. Her name, Pandora, means all gifted. She was at once a masterpiece and an experiment, an echo of Prometheus's audacity, made now by Zeus himself. In her hands, they placed a sealed jar. Later storytellers would call it a box, but the older image is heavier, closer to something that might hold restoration or ruin. It was ornate, sealed, and forbidden to open. Zeus's intention was not to hand her a weapon, but a condition, an object that required choice. The gods knew human beings were now creators through fire. What they lacked was restraint. The jar would test it. Pandora was then sent to live among men, not as punishment alone, but as a catalyst. Her beauty concealed a directive written by the gods themselves, to awaken consequence through curiosity. When she arrived on the earth, the world still pulsed with the warmth of Prometheus's fire. Humanity thrived, unaware that divinity was watching closely. Pandora lived among them, and because all gifts attract attention, mortals admired her brilliance without perceiving her purpose. Her presence showed that beauty can work like flame, inviting approach while hiding danger. One day, whether by design or impulse, the seal on the jar gave way. The old songs say it happened with hesitation, not defiance. The lid lifted, and what escaped could not be returned. From that opening poured the world's first afflictions: pain, disease, envy, grief, and untimely death. Forces that would forever shadow human endeavor rose like smoke, invisible yet unstoppable. They spread across the earth, turning perfection into struggle, making every joy fragile. Pandora, in horror, tried to close the jar, but the air had already transformed. Only one thing clung to the bottom: Olympus, hope. The lid fell shut before she could release it. Humanity was left surrounded by hardship, but anchored by this single, unseen resource. The story pauses there, on that disturbing edge. Hope, the last of the contents, trapped inside. For the ancient poets, the meaning was open. Some thought Zeus meant it as mercy, hope preserved, protected from corruption until mortals earned it through endurance. Others believed it was part of the punishment, hope restrained, so that humans would never possess assurance, only expectation. Either way, the myth captured a truth woven into Greek thought. Existence is freedom within containment. Life unfolds between the open jar and the sealed remainder, between suffering and resilience. Even within divine limitation, something in humanity stays luminous. What the jar holds becomes more than an inventory of misery. it becomes a mirror of human unpredictability. The gods could no longer intervene directly in every life. Instead, they built conditions that would regulate behavior indirectly. Pandora herself was one such condition. Intelligence paired with impulse, tenderness balanced by curiosity. She was not a villain nor a saint, but an instrument of equilibrium. The jar symbolized control through uncertainty, a design cleverer than any law. The gods could now rule not by presence, but by environment. Each deity's contribution to her nature reflects a facet of human complexity. Athena's wisdom ensured that curiosity would lead to progress, not paralysis. Aphrodite's desire gave attachment meaning. Hermes' wit introduced misunderstanding and invention. Hera's sense of dignity colored love with rivalry. Zeus's command rested over all of it, ensuring none of these qualities could exist in isolation. The result was a creature capable of greatness and error in equal measure. Through Pandora, the gods created a lineage that would embody both. This story ties divine politics directly to human fate. After Prometheus, humans had become semi-divine in craft, but lacked the discipline of immortals. Zeus responded not by removing fire, but by setting a mechanism that would make freedom self-limiting. Pain now ensured gratitude. Sickness inspired compassion. Death made memory sacred. Even failure generated progress. The cosmos, through Pandora, invented sustainable imbalance. The same freedom that caused rebellion could now sustain civilization. In this logic, the gods did not dominate. They administered. They turned morality into ecology. The jar's opening introduces the first feedback loop of mythic governance. Every joy would carry risk. Every pain would teach adaptation. If humanity showed greed, suffering would remind them of modesty. If they despaired, hope, still faintly audible beneath the lid, would call them back. The myth delivers a radical idea for its time. Even punishment holds possibility. The gods did not intend to destroy mortals, only to refine them through difficulty. Humanity's freedom is born inside containment. Over generations, Pandora's story came to stand for more than feminine curiosity. It became a model for human consciousness itself. Curiosity creates trauma, yet brings wisdom. Restraint preserves hope, yet delays revelation. The tension between those forces defines moral experience. From the Greeks' perspective, Zeus's design ensured that mortals would never be static. They would live as apprentices to struggle, shaping culture out of imperfection. The retention of hope becomes the final mystery. Why was it left inside? Some interpretations see hope as divine compensation, a hidden grace ensuring that despair never wins completely. Others see it as a reminder that hope too can deceive, by delaying acceptance of limits. The ambiguity gives the myth its power. Hope is both medicine and mirage, and human endurance depends on walking that fine line. Even within the divinely imposed limitations of suffering and unpredictability, humanity retains the essential capacity for hope, which acts as a crucial buffer against despair and enables continued existence. The Greeks understood survival not as escape from suffering, but as coexistence with it. Through that coexistence, human identity took shape. The world was no longer a gift given freely. It became a task maintained through effort. Each harvest, each friendship, each act of art now carried the shadow of Pandora's jar behind it. Hope, still sealed, hummed beneath experience as potential. That structure, freedom checked by consequence, mirrored the very government of Olympus. The gods, too, lived under limitation. Oaths bound their speech, fate measured their days, and even Zeus bowed to necessity. The Olympian order projected its own image onto humanity. rule through boundaries that protect as they confine. Over time, stories of Pandora softened her image. Poets began to see her not as a bringer of doom, but as humanity's first companion in endurance. She represented the point where divine intent met human interpretation. From her act sprang both the fragility and the wonder that define mortal life. Without her, existence would be effortless and dull. With her, it became dynamic, filled with both peril and promise. Real progress, the myth suggests, does not come from perfection, but from persistence. Her story closes quietly, with the jar sealed again. Hope remains inside, not vanished, but waiting. It becomes that persistent hum beneath our decisions, the sense that something unseen sustains effort, even when reason falters. The Greeks treated hope as the thinnest but strongest thread tying humanity to the divine. It neither rescues nor condemns, it simply allows continuation. As long as it exists, despair cannot finish what pain begins. What this means is that humanity was never made to live without limits. The gods shaped a world where striving would always replace satisfaction. Yet from that design grew compassion, art, and philosophy, the very things that make endurance meaningful. Hope keeps humanity from collapsing under the weight of its knowledge. It moderates ambition without extinguishing it. With Pandora, the mythology of balance completes its turn. Fire had given humans power. Pandora gave them awareness. She embodied the dual gift of consciousness, the ability to suffer and to imagine relief at once. Her myth concludes the foundation of human experience: freedom contained, pain enlightened, hope preserved. The cosmos now held steady. The Olympians ruled by condition rather than presence, setting rules instead of intervening endlessly. Humanity, equipped with knowledge, emotion, and hope, entered its own narrative. From this moment forward, history itself became the theater where divine order would be tested through wars, vows, and prophecies written in the language of consequence. And as the old world braced for its next age, the gods waited to see whether mortals could truly carry the weight of the fire still burning in their hands. But as coexistence with it. Even kingly Zeus bows to something greater, threads no thunderbolt can cut. In the oldest accounts, those threads belong to the Moirai, the fates who spun, measured, and severed the lives of mortals and immortals alike. Each strand was unique, yet woven into a larger design no god could see in full. The Greeks pictured them not as distant abstractions, but as weavers, working quietly beyond Olympus. Even Zeus, master of thunder, could not unmake what they decreed. That limits the legend in a way that surprises many listeners. Power in Greek myth always has an edge it cannot cross, and recognizing that edge defines wisdom. The Moirai lived outside hierarchy. They did not rebel against Zeus because they did not need to. Their authority was absolute by nature. They neither obeyed nor resisted. They simply were. Their tools looked harmless: spindle, rod, and shears. Yet from those instruments came a law stronger than lightning. The first fate spun the thread of being, the second measured it, and the third cut it. This act framed every life as a process moving toward completion. For mortals, the implication was clear. Destiny shaped birth and death. For gods, the message struck deeper. Even eternity had proportions. Zeus ruled by thunder, but their work defined when and where thunder should fall. This realization anchored the cosmic government. After wars and oaths, stability required recognition that no single will, however divine, could govern all things. Zeus's authority extended over law and order. yet fate stood like a ceiling above him. When mythic poets described him consulting the fates, they were showing awareness rather than submission. He acted within limits deliberately. It was not weakness, it was balance. By accepting the Moirai's supremacy, Zeus prevented his rule from hardening into tyranny. The threads worked like the checks in a living system, ensuring that even heaven operated by measure rather than impulse. Such limitations shaped how Greeks imagined wisdom. A ruler who knows how to stop wields power more elegantly than one who never stops. Zeus's might depended on awareness of what could not be changed. Across the centuries, artists showed him glancing at the loom of the fates before deciding, as though to confirm that justice aligned with destiny. What this means is that divine order was no longer defined by command. It evolved into dialogue between cause and outcome. Fate was not punishment, it was structure. Through this lens, prophecy gained importance. If fate was the pattern, prophecy was its language. The Greeks built sanctuaries where mortals and gods could approach the mystery through questions rather than decrees. Delphi became the heart of this conversation. There, the oracular priestess listened to the murmurs of earth and spoke riddles shaped by Apollo's breath. Dodona, older still, worked through the rustling of oak leaves that answered inquiry with sound instead of speech. Both sites reflected the same principle. Destiny may be fixed in outline, but not in detail. Knowledge of what is coming never grants control over it. It only demands interpretation. Prophecy, by design, was ambiguous. A phrase could turn either way depending on how it was heard. The Greeks saw ambiguity not as a flaw, but as a safeguard. When mortals misread oracles, calamity followed, not because fate misled them, but because they treated knowledge as license. This tension between knowing and acting became one of mythology's most persistent lessons. The web of fate included choice inside it, so that freedom and inevitability coexisted. The gods themselves made mistakes of interpretation. Each time they attempted to outsmart destiny, the narrative tightened around them. The relationship between fate and free action parallels how natural laws operate in our own thought. One can move freely within parameters, but the boundaries remain absolute. The Moirai symbolized those parameters. Prophecy represented attempts to read them. In this system, Zeus functioned less as a dictator and more as a balancing force. His acceptance of limits modeled ethical restraint, showing that wisdom grows from cooperation with necessity. Through the Moirai, Greek cosmology achieved completion. Chaos shaped into rule, rule tempered by law, and law measured by inevitability. Several myths illustrate this entanglement of choice and control. When Thetis, a sea goddess, birthed Achilles, prophecy declared he would die young but glorious. Neither mortal nor divine action could change the outcome. Yet within that fate lay infinite variation, acts of courage, compassion, and error that defined his legend. The prophecy framed life, the living gave it meaning. This interplay made Greek myths feel human even when speaking of gods. Everyone, immortal or not, moved toward a predetermined end, shaped by how well they recognized its direction. For Zeus himself, prophecy served as a reflection. Each oracle reminded him that leadership is temporary, even in heaven. Civilizations ebb, divine eras shift. The Moirai would remain when even Olympus dimmed. Their impartial weaving ensured that time itself never bent toward favoritism. That permanence guarded the universe from stagnation. Tyranny requires certainty, but the Moirai offered none, only consistency. Their very indifference kept creation breathing. This structure also birthed perspective. Knowing that some events cannot be postponed teaches humility. For the Greeks, such humility signified intelligence. Zeus's authority, bounded by destiny, became an act of self-restraint, one that distinguished justice from domination. That recognition formed his truest wisdom. He reigned not because he could defeat fate, but because he understood the cost of trying. His thunderbolts punished hubris, that fatal arrogance that forgets boundaries. Even the gods themselves feared to live beyond measure. Oracles and fates together formed what we might call the moral circuitry of the cosmos. The Moirai set the parameters. The oracles transmitted hints of them. Mortals and gods interpreted those hints through desire and mistake. Myth turned this process into a narrative discipline. Every triumph contains seeds of future downfall, precisely because the thread continues past the point of victory. Fate enforced rotation, preventing creation from freezing into perfection. In that circular motion, myth mirrored a natural cycle, the renewal of seasons, decay feeding growth. When storytellers speak of thread and spindle, they picture not only mortality, but correction. Fate works as a built-in mechanism against imbalance, intervening when arrogance overreaches. Even Zeus's reign followed that rhythm. His adherence to the Moirai's structure protected both divine and mortal worlds from collapse. Without fate's horizon, law itself would dissolve into preference. By letting destiny stand above him, Zeus ensured the cosmos stayed lawful, even when tempests broke. This is why the Greeks treated the revelation of limits as an awakening, not doom. To know what cannot be controlled allows one to focus on what can. Fate offered form to freedom, not opposition to it. Prophecy played the mediating role, transforming the unknown into shared questions. When humans approached an oracle, they entered into the same process that governed Olympus, the search for harmony with boundaries. Wisdom became the art of reading signs without demanding certainty. As centuries passed, the imagery of spinning thread took on a broader meaning. Philosophers compared it to logic, poets to art, statesmen to governance. Each drew from that old mythic idea: the world remains intact because every act meets proportion. The fates did not rule through punishment. They balanced excess across time. Their patience outlasted storms. Their quiet labor mended what violence tore. Even for Zeus, they were not rivals, but reminders that justice must always face something higher than authority. The equilibrium of the cosmic government depended on that humility. The fates supplied the ultimate restraint, a horizon not to be crossed. Beneath that boundary, Zeus's court could rule with confidence. Above it, mystery persisted, unreachable and necessary. Humanity, catching hints of this through oracles and dreams, built its moral systems in imitation. The same pattern echoed in the laws of city-states and in philosophies that taught moderation over force. Myth provided the first template of limited power. In this recognition, the violent arc of divine succession finally steadied. The cosmos, once born in chaos and rebellion, matured into a self-regulating order. Zeus, shaped by memory and insight, transformed from conqueror to maintainer. His justice arose not from domination, but from awareness of measure. The Moirai remained unseen, yet omnipresent, the invisible constitution beneath gods and people alike. The idea that even a ruler of the heavens must bow to something greater resonates through every story that followed. It is the pivot between myth and philosophy, between legend and culture. The Greeks carried it into their politics and their art, seeing in each act of creation the reminder that power without boundary leads back to chaos. From this understanding grew theater, ethics, and the earliest reflections on destiny as design. Under the watch of the fates, order at last felt complete, not perfect, just sustainable. Zeus's thunder could shake mountains, but the quiet rhythm of weaving kept them from floating away. Fate held the thread. Prophecy translated its hum. Law adjusted around it. The universe, newly aware of its own limits, entered an age of reflection rather than reaction. Order had learned humility, and from that realization, the thread that binds uncertainty to understanding, the myths of rebellion and rule faded into myths of insight. The stage was set for a new theme, how divine compromise would ripple outward into the living world, shaping art, ritual, and the imagination that still tries to read what the fates never fully revealed. The gods didn't just create the world, they negotiated it into being, generation after generation, through struggle and compromise. Each uprising shaped law, each oath refined power. By the time Zeus ruled, the cosmos had become a living constitution, a balance written in thunder, blood, and understanding. Every hero's journey that follows begins inside this system, crafted from rebellion, bound by justice, and sustained by story. The myths remind us that order is not born, it is maintained. And if you listen closely to any tale after this, you can still hear the echo of that first thunderbolt making order from chaos.